Well, Australian troops have now been in Afghanistan for the best part of a decade. It's hard to believe this year marks the 10th anniversary of the September 11 terrorist attacks. One of the world's leading experts on Al-Qaeda is Peter Bergen. His new book is called The Longest War. In it, he argues that 9/11 was the climax of Al-Qaeda's power and that it's been in decline ever since.
One of the themes of the book is Al-Qaeda is sort of losing the war of ideas in the Muslim world. Any number of polls around the Muslim world indicate that support for Al-Qaeda, bin Laden, suicide bombing is dropping. And of course, Al-Qaeda, which means the base in Arabic, lost its base in Afghanistan. So, taken together, the fact that it's not doing well, a lot of Muslims recognize that Al-Qaeda is not the solution to their problems. And the fact that Al-Qaeda has taken a tremendous amount of hits since 9/11. They can never do anything on the scale of 9/11. Now, that's not to say that Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, whether in Australia or in the United States or in Britain, can't mount, small-scale attacks, but they are not going to be anything on the scale of 9/11.
So how serious does Al-Qaeda remain as a threat, given what you've just said?
I don't want the viewers to sort of think that because the threat is receding that somehow we should just essentially stop our operations in Afghanistan or around the world against Al-Qaeda and its allies, because one of the things that we learned is that if we kind of let Al-Qaeda and its allies, thrive in ungoverned spaces, whether in Afghanistan or Somalia or anywhere else, they tend to regroup and they train more people, and it's not like they're suddenly going to magically decide that the United States and its allies are not targets in the future merely because we think that the threat has receded.
So do you consider continuing involvement in Afghanistan by the US and its allies to be essential?
Yeah, I think it's vital. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. Afghans were extremely concerned the United States was serious about drawing down in July 2011, and they don't want America and its allies to leave Afghanistan. They want us to sort of perform. If you look at polling data, Afghans actually have a pretty favorable view of international forces right now. It's like 65% or so. That's an astonishing number if you think we've been in Afghanistan for 10 years.
Given what you say about Al-Qaeda taking hits post 9/11, does this mean the so-called war on terror was a success?
Well, there were lots of failures in the war on terror. Guantanamo was sort of a moral failure. You've written about it extensively. Any number of polls around the Muslim world found that most people don't like hypocrisy. And so when the Bush administration was preaching the virtues of democracy and human rights and then reserving the right to abrogate those rights for its own purposes, whether at Guantanamo or in coercive interrogations, that lost the United States the moral high ground. I think the recent events in the Middle East have really accelerated some things that I underline in the book, which are Al-Qaeda just losing the war of ideas in the Muslim world, not because the United States and its allies were winning that war, which is always a rather naive way to look at it, but simply because Muslims have sort of woken up to the fact that, after the Bali attack of 2002, when Jamaat Islamiyah came back and attacked in Bali again and attacked in Jakarta on 2 occasions, most of the victims were Indonesian civilians. And for a group that positions itself as defending Islam, the fact that so many of its victims are Muslim civilians, and that story was not just in Indonesia, but it was in Jordan, in Iraq, in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, Afghanistan. We've seen that story play out again and again. So I think, Al-Qaeda and its allies are making a set of errors, which means that over time they will just become less and less relevant. Will the war against them ever end? There will be no formal signing ceremony on some aircraft carrier, certainly. But one way of saying that it's sort of over is when it's no longer a subject of public discussion, as we're having now.
Is the US still focused on capturing Osama bin Laden?
Good question. The short answer is, of course, yes. Bin Laden just celebrated his 54th birthday, by the way. I don't want to trivialize how difficult it is to find somebody like Bin Laden who's not making the obvious errors that get you caught talking on a cell phone, satellite phone. No one in his immediate circle are going to, catch. They're not going to pick up a reward for him because the people in his immediate circle aren't motivated by money. We could have this conversation 10 years from now. Bin Laden could still be out there. He may even die in his bed at this rate because as far as we know, there hasn't really been any good information about his exact whereabouts since December of 2001 when he disappeared at the Battle of Tora Bora.
We know all about the pre-9/11 intelligence failures in the United States. How would you evaluate the performance of US intelligence agencies today?
Well, I mean, I think if this was a private corporation, American taxpayers have spent $500 billion on intelligence since 9/11. And if it was a private corporation that couldn't answer the question, where is Osama bin Laden, 10 years after 9/11, I think the shareholders would be in revolt. I mean, I think the American intelligence community is full of some very smart people, has done some very good work. But on this rather central issue of where is the leader of Al-Qaeda, you know, they're coming up empty, and they've come up empty now for almost a decade. And I think that sort of speaks volumes about how the agency conducts business. We're very good. The United States is, as you know, Lee, having worked here for many years, you know, the signals intelligence of the United States is just, you know, we're absorbing more signals intelligence than we can possibly process. But we're not that good on human intelligence.
Peter Bergen, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Lee.